A 23-year-old woman lies on an operating table, awake. Not sedated, awake. Two doctors stand over her, and one of them asks her to start reciting the Lord's Prayer. She does. Then they ask her to sing, "God Bless America." She does that too. Because here's the thing, the doctors aren't testing her memory for fun. They're using her voice as a gauge. As long as she keeps talking, keeps singing, keeps making sense, they keep cutting. Somewhere around the middle of the operation, her words start to slur. Then they stop making sense. Then they stop altogether. That's when the doctors know they've cut enough. Her name was Rosemary Kennedy. Yes, that Kennedy family. And in the 15 minutes it took to go quiet on that table, the sister of a future American president lost the rest of her life as she knew it. So how did a family that would go on to occupy the White House end up here? Who convinced them this was medicine? And how did this exact same procedure end up performed on tens of thousands of ordinary people, including children as young as 7? Grab a seat. We need to go back 6 years earlier to a chimpanzee lab to understand how we got to that operating table at all. It didn't start with a scalpel. It started with two chimpanzees who stopped throwing tantrums. And one man in the audience decided the same idea might work on human beings. In 1935, a Portuguese neurologist named Antonio Egas Moniz was already a respected name in medicine. He pioneered a technique for imaging blood vessels in the brain, and he badly wanted a Nobel Prize to go with it. That November, at a conference in London, he watched a presentation on two chimps whose frontal lobes had been surgically altered. The formerly frustrated, aggressive animals had become oddly calm afterward. Moniz saw an opportunity. Within days, back in Lisbon, he had his assistant drill 2 holes into the skull of a 63-year-old female patient and inject alcohol directly into her frontal lobes, destroying the tissue. He called it a leucotomy. History barely remembers her name, but she is patient 0 of the modern lobotomy. Moniz refined the method, started operating on more patients, and reported dramatic improvements in anxiety and paranoia. The medical world took notice. So did the Nobel Committee. In 1949, Moniz won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for discovering the therapeutic value of the procedure. But Moniz never scaled this into a mass phenomenon. That took an American with a lot more ambition and a lot less surgical training. He wasn't even a surgeon, and that never stopped him. By the time he was done, he'd turn a brain operation into something you could do in a parking lot. Walter Freeman was a neurologist at George Washington University, sharp, charismatic, and obsessed with the idea that America's overcrowded, understaffed psychiatric hospitals needed a fast fix. In 1936, alongside neurosurgeon James Watts, he performed the first prefrontal lobotomy in the United States. But drilling into skulls in an operating room was slow, and it required, well, an operating room. So Freeman got creative. In 1946, after hearing about an Italian technique that entered the brain through the eye socket, he tried it himself, first using an actual ice pick from his kitchen. He'd render the patient unconscious with electroshock, then slide the pick above the eyeball, tap it through the thin bone with a small hammer, and sweep it side to side to sever connections in the brain. No incision, no operating room. 10 minutes, start to finish. Freeman was thrilled. He eventually built a custom instrument for it and started driving around the country in a van reporters nicknamed the lobotomobile, performing the procedure in state hospitals, sometimes for schizophrenia, sometimes for severe depression, and eventually for far less severe things like chronic headaches. He was by nearly every account a showman, and showmen need an audience willing to buy in. One family was about to buy in completely. You already met her in our cold open. Now let's talk about why it happened. A father's fear of scandal was about to cost his daughter everything. Rosemary Kennedy was the eldest daughter of Joseph and Rose Kennedy, sister to a future president, John F. Kennedy, and future Senator, Robert F. Kennedy. She struggled in school, had mood swings, and as she got older, she began sneaking out at night. Her father, Joseph, deeply focused on his son's political futures, worried she'd become pregnant or cause a public scandal that could damage the family name. Freeman offered what sounded like a solution, a procedure that made difficult patients calm and manageable. In November 1941, without telling his wife Rose beforehand, Joseph Kennedy authorized the surgery. What happened next is the scene we opened with. Rosemary, awake, reciting the Lord's Prayer, singing, counting backward, until her responses dissolved into silence. Dr. Watts later recalled they'd gone in through the top of the head, judging how far to cut based on how coherent she remained. The operation left Rosemary permanently and severely disabled, unable to walk without assistance, unable to speak clearly. She was quietly moved to an institution in Wisconsin, and for the next 20 years, most of the American public, and much of her own family, had no idea what had happened to her. Rosemary wasn't a rare case. She was one of an estimated 40,000 to 50,000 Americans who underwent this procedure, and some of them were far too young to have any say in it at all. 28 lobotomies in one day, on women who didn't choose to be there, and one of Freeman's patients hadn't even hit puberty yet. By the early 1950s, Freeman had turned his 10-minute procedure into a traveling circuit. In July 1952 alone, he performed 228 transorbital lobotomies in West Virginia in 2 weeks, a project newspapers grimly nicknamed Operation Ice Pick. On his most extreme days, he reportedly lobotomized dozens of patients in a single sitting. Then, in December 1960, a 12-year-old boy named Howard Dully was brought to Freeman's office by his stepmother, who found him difficult to manage. Howard had no severe mental illness. He was just a kid who didn't get along with his stepmom. Freeman operated anyway. Howard survived, grew into adulthood, and for decades told almost no one what had happened to him. Then, in his 50s, he tracked down Freeman's own sealed medical files, becoming the first of Freeman's former patients ever to do so, and turned his search into a story that finally forced the country to reckon with just how far this procedure had gone. His courage in speaking out, decades later, is the closest thing this story has to a hero stepping directly into the light. But the practice itself was already dying, not because of outrage, but because of a pill. In 1954, a single new drug did what decades of ethical concern couldn't. So, why didn't Freeman stop? That year, the antipsychotic drug chlorpromazine, sold as Thorazine, hit the market. For the first time, doctors had a way to calm severe psychiatric symptoms without touching a patient's skull. Almost overnight, demand for lobotomies collapsed. Freeman refused to let go. He kept operating into the 1960s, even as the medical establishment turned against him, and his old surgical partner, James Watts, publicly broke ties over the transorbital method. It finally ended in February 1967, when one of Freeman's patients died from a brain hemorrhage during surgery. Hospitals banned him from operating again. He spent his final years quietly, traveling the country to check on his old patients, seemingly unable to accept what he'd built, or what it had cost. Rosemary Kennedy lived until 2005, cared for at St. Coletta in Wisconsin, largely out of public view. But her story had one more chapter. Her sister, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, shaped in part by Rosemary's life, went on to found the Special Olympics, turning private heartbreak into a global movement for people with intellectual disabilities. The lobotomy is a story with very few clean heroes. But it's also a reminder of something we still have to watch for today. How easily we have to do something can become an excuse for doing something terrible, and how much courage it takes, like Howard Dully's, to finally say what happened out loud.